All right, guys. So we just watched the Moist Critical talking about YouTube, Susan Wojcicki, and the new guy, Bo Bungus. That's the new CEO, the new boss. And this is part of the thing. Apparently, a lot of this centralizes around a court case. And the Legal Eagle got a video, and Moist Critical recommended it, so let's watch it.
Potential to end the internet as this case has the potential to end the internet as we know it. The internet flourishes on user-generated content. It's the backbone of the internet. And if you write or say something that is illegal, you could be held liable for what you said. But usually the websites that host your content are not liable. And when you hear about Section 230, this is usually what we're talking about. But if websites were also liable for what users say, the websites would either shut down almost everything or police things so tightly that there would be basically nothing even remotely objectionable. Because if there's one thing that websites hate, it's being on the hook for billions and billions of dollars of potential liability and attorney's fees. And this isn't just some potential hypothetical. In the past, when laws made websites liable for user content, they just shut down the content and never came back. And one case before the Supreme Court...
Well, I don't think that they would... I don't think that they would go that far to shut down. But I could see them thinking like, wow, this is a huge liability. It's not even worth like really caring about this to some extent. But I mean, if that does happen, then what's the outcome? They're going to be super restrictive on what you can and can't post. So it's going to be frustrating.
This term seeks to do exactly that, but for all of the internet. No joke. This has the potential to end the internet as we know it today. So how did we get here?
How did I get here?
Well, it started with a tragedy. Noemi Gonzalez was a design major at California State University, Long Beach, who was spending a semester studying in Paris. Okay. On the evening of November 15th, 2015, she was dining with friends at a cafe on the Champs-Élysées when an ISIS terrorist with a gun opened fire. Jesus. Gonzalez was killed along with 130 other people in coordinated attacks at 6 locations across the city. ISIS claimed responsibility for the attacks, and eventually 20 men were convicted of crimes related to the massacre. The lone surviving gunman was sentenced to life without parole. So, was justice served? Well, the Gonzalez family contends that it was not because there was another perpetrator still.
Wait, so this is somebody, they're being sued by like a family and not like by the government. Okay.
At large. YouTube. The family sued Google, which owns YouTube, alleging that YouTube's algorithms amplify violent videos and hateful content, despite the company's efforts to ban violent accounts and limit their reach.
Just like Ben Shapiro videos, guys. We got to get rid of them. Sorry, I shouldn't be joking too much about this.
The Gonzalez family says that YouTube's recommendations expose people to hateful content, radicalize viewers, and encourage them to make terrorist attacks of their own. Google argued that because ISIS, not YouTube, made and uploaded those videos, YouTube was not the provider or developer of those videos, and therefore it was immune from liability under 47 U.S.C. Section 230.
What an interesting situation. Because on the one hand, I think it's really difficult. It has to be super difficult to provide the infrastructure to be able to censor stuff to that degree. Because like there's so many YouTube videos, and that's why a lot of the monitoring of it is like algorithm based. So I couldn't imagine them being able to do a whole, like they couldn't cover every field. On the other hand, I mean, it's bad that people die, right? And the platform itself is being used to signal boost to these messages. So I don't know. I wonder what the middle ground there would be. Like, how would you? I mean, like better technology that could. Oh, that's not good. Better technology that could figure out if there's a bad thing in the video. I know that sounds stupid and like very juvenile the way I said it. But like better AI technology that can find bad stuff. Like for instance, TikTok has a huge problem with like showing boobs right now. Girls are just showing their like actual whole breasts as a trend. And so the solution would be to develop some kind of an AI technology to monitor that in a better way. Okay.
Otherwise known as Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Section 230 of the CDA immunizes internet services for the content that its users upload and often allows websites to remove content without taking on liability. But the Gonzalez plaintiffs contend that YouTube's recommendations should not be covered by Section 230 because the company is acting like a content creator rather than a publisher. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals held that the Gonzalez claims fell within Section 230 and Google was immune from suit.
Wait, they're saying that they went to the recommended section? I mean, what is that? Do they mean like the front page, or are they just talking about like it's recommended like at the end of a video based on your stuff?
The Gonzalez parties appealed, and the Supreme Court granted cert to answer the question of whether Section 230 immunizes an interactive computer service from liability for recommending other party content. Now, in support of their claims, plaintiffs allege that, quote, 2 of the 12 ISIS terrorists who carried out the attacks used online social media platforms to post links to ISIS recruitment YouTube videos and, quote, jihadi YouTube videos. One of the men who fired Gonzalez had appeared in an ISIS recruiting video in 2014. Now, the plaintiffs argue that the defendants violated the Anti-Terrorism Act, the ATA, by allowing ISIS to post videos on YouTube. Under Section 2333 of the ATA, as amended by the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, Americans who are injured by, quote, an act of international terrorism that is committed, planned, or authorized by a terrorist organization may sue any person who, quote, aids and abets by knowingly providing substantial assistance or who conspires with a person who committed such.
Well, but how do you prove knowingly? I mean, that feels like it kind of kills the case. And it's sad because, like, they lost their kids, so it's horrible. Like, a lot of people died. But how do they prove, like, the knowingly, that intentionality is obviously not provable unless they, oh my God, unless they think that YouTube actually wanted this to happen and conspired and
such an act of international terrorism and recover treble damages. So the legal question in the lower courts was whether a social media platform that was not used to commit a specific, quote, act of international terrorism may still be liable for aiding and abetting under Section 2333. The plaintiffs say that the answer is yes, that Google aided and abetted an act of international terrorism, conspired with the perpetrator of an act of international terrorism, and provided material support to ISIS by allowing ISIS to use YouTube. And of course, the defendants say no, the plaintiffs' claims are barred by Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which often immunizes interactive computer services, aka websites, even when they make targeted recommendations. The trial court and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals sided with Google, ruling that the claims fell within Section 230, Section C, because ISIS, not YouTube, created or developed the relevant content. The court said that YouTube, quote, selects the particular content provided to a user based on that user's inputs. The display of recommended content results from algorithms that are merely, quote, tools meant to facilitate the communication and content of others, and not content in and of themselves. As the lower courts noted, the recommendations are based on the user's preferences, not YouTube's.
Sure,
the plaintiffs argue that Section 230...
But this is one of those problems that, like, fundamentally need to be solved, because this is how people become radicalized. So YouTube basically just wants to show you content that you're going to. It doesn't want to show you content you want to see. It wants to show you content that you're going to engage in. I know that doesn't sound like it's any different, but it is. Just trust me. Right? So that's why you might see so much like really hateful content in your For You page. You don't want to see it, but you're going to continue to watch it because hate farming really is the greatest way for people to engage with content. For whatever reason, people like to be angry and like to be outraged, like to be frustrated, et cetera, et cetera. And so the algorithm will show you that stuff, and that's how you just constantly get more radicalized, because it'll start with, and it happens across the board. Bro, really? It happens across the board. That's usually when people talk about like the alt-right pipeline, and it starts with Papa Gut. Maybe you watch a Papa Gut take, and like, I don't know, it's about some topic, and I'm slightly right-leaning on that topic, and then all of a sudden you watch a few other Papa Gut videos, and I'm not really a right-leaning content creator, but it's like, you get my point. And then all of a sudden you watch like a Ben Shapiro video, and it's like, okay, Ben's conservative, but he's not really that bad. And then all of a sudden you end up on an even more far-right, like, oh, Nick Fuentes, he's not on the platform anymore, but you get the point, and that's kind of the idea. And so I guess whatever this person was viewing, maybe he was watching Call of Duty videos, and I don't know, something else, and it just, I don't know why Call of Duty, and it just got him to see these things, and he just kept looking at it like, oh, these are the answers. It's almost like manosphere content. It's like, oh, the Western world's terrible, it's horrible, it's oppressive, it's the worst thing in the world, blah, 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 women meant to do this, that, all your problems are somebody else's fault, blah, 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 and kind of just like spirals out of control.
C does not apply to, quote, activities that promote or recommend content. So let's dig deeper into what all of this means. First of all, the plaintiffs are not simply arguing that platforms are liable because terrorists have used their services. They argue that the powerful algorithms that recommend content are not covered by the CDA because the recommendations are content in and of themselves. And as the Ninth Circuit said, the complaint alleges Google uses computer algorithms to match and suggest content to users based upon their viewing history. The Gonzalez plaintiffs allege that in this way, Google has recommended ISIS videos to users and enabled users to locate other videos and accounts related to ISIS, and that by doing so, Google assists ISIS in spreading its message. So the plaintiffs claim that YouTube facilitates communications between ISIS and people who watch their videos, thereby aiding ISIS in recruiting new members. The plaintiffs acknowledge that YouTube removed ISIS videos and suspended or blocked ISIS users at various times. However, the plaintiffs claim that YouTube should have been able to stop ISIS from re-establishing accounts using new identities. And the plaintiffs allege that Google left some of the ISIS videos up because they did not contain content violating the site's policies.
Oh, well, there we go. What? Wow, what an interesting thing. So they left some ISIS videos up because they didn't explicitly violate the policies? That's a fucking terrorist organization, no? Why would you... That seems a little sussy. Okay.
At other times, Google removed the offending content, but did not suspend or ban the accounts. Now, we've talked about Section 230 of the CDA many times on this channel. Section 230 was created back in 1996 at the dawn of the internet. It has two key provisions. Section 230C1 says, quote, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. This sentence is often called the 26 words that created the internet. This section stipulates that providing access to third-party content does not make an online provider the publisher or speaker of that content. Now, the second major part of the law is section 230C2, the so-called Good Samaritan provision, which states, quote, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be held liable on account of any action voluntarily taken in good faith to restrict access to or availability of material that the provider or user considers to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable, whether or not such material is constitutionally protected. So this provision gives online platforms broad immunity from liability if they moderate content in good faith. This provision was meant to allow websites to police itself without incurring new liability, because it was...
I would imagine they'd be able to argue that they did it in good faith, even though they left some of those ISIS videos up, because they'd probably just be like, oh, it was a freedom of speech issue. We didn't want to take it down, and it didn't technically violate our, you know, whatever, my guidelines.
An issue of knowledge. A website might not know what speech was hosted on that particular website, in which case they wouldn't be liable for it. But if they knew that illegal speech or defamatory speech or some other kind of speech was hosted there and then took steps to remove it from the website itself, then they actively had knowledge of that particular speech and thus might become liable for hosting it in the future. So websites...
Okay. Now I see where the argument's going. Okay. So I think that what they got them on, which they might actually get them on it, is that they identified that there were ISIS videos that were like bad. I'm assuming beheading videos, but maybe they weren't that bad. But anyway, they banned the video, but they didn't necessarily ban all the accounts that were doing it. They might have just removed it. And so because of that, they still allowed like a pathway and somewhat of a comfortable space for these people pushing these horrible content, radicalizing content. They allowed a platform for them to use to radicalize more people, to cause more harm. Oh, okay. Sure. That's a mistake. Yeah. Okay. I could see where they're coming from. That makes sense.
Found themselves on the horns of a dilemma until Section 230 of the CDA was passed to allow them to engage in good faith moderation. Because there was generally a knowledge requirement to be liable for things that were hosted on your website. If you had no knowledge of what kind of speech was on your website or platform, then you generally weren't liable for it.
Then you'd be really irresponsible. No. Oh shit, what the fuck is that?
But the argument went that if you started to moderate your website, then that was evidence that you knew what was on there, and therefore you became liable for all the stuff that you were trying to remove from your website. And this applied to spam, to pornography, to pirated media, to defamation, you name it. So the CDA was enacted in 1996 when the internet was still in its infancy. At the time, companies like America Online, CompuServe, and Prodigy were the portals that allowed people to access the internet. People could share files, exchange messages, and chat with each other in real time. But that posed a dilemma. Who would be liable if a user posted something defamatory or shared something else that was illegal? Would liability go beyond the person that was responsible for the post? Or would the internet companies who hosted the content also be on the hook? And that brings us to the distinction between content publishers, distributors, and platforms, which is often completely misunderstood. In the pre-internet age, publishers, distributors, and platforms were treated differently under the law. Publishers were newspapers, magazines, and broadcast stations. They were generally liable for republishing material from third parties since they solicited the things that they published and they could vet those materials. Distributors were businesses like bookstores, newsstands, and libraries, which distributed material that was printed by others. And distributors were not required to assess every book that they sold. For example, in the 1950s, the Supreme Court overturned a Los Angeles ordinance that said, if you have obscene material in your bookstore, you can be held criminally responsible. And in that case, a bookstore owner was convicted of violating the ordinance by selling a novel called Sweeter Than Life, which tells the story of a, quote, ruthless lesbian businesswoman. The Supreme Court said that the bookstore couldn't be responsible for reviewing every single thing in the book or magazine that it sells. And distributors only had liability if someone notified them that something they carried was illegal. That's sort of the origin of the knowledge requirement. And platforms were common carriers like phone companies and television broadcasters. Platforms weren't liable for third-party content that they carried. So, for example, let's say AT&T found out that someone's answering machine had a libelous outgoing message. Was AT&T required to act by canceling the owner's telephone service? Well, the court said no. AT&T couldn't be sued for libel simply because the owner used its service to say something libelous. And similarly, a broadcaster wasn't liable.
So interesting, because then that gets into the conversation, like, what's the difference between a phone call and a YouTube video? Because what they're saying is that some, like, let's say, I mean, libel, I don't know exactly, but let's say somebody called up and said, like, I'm gonna kill Captain Underpants, bro. They're saying that AT&T isn't liable for that because, you know, just because they're using their service doesn't mean that they're liable. But then YouTube is a similar thing. Like, let's say I make a video saying everybody should kill Captain Underpants. We got to find this guy. It gets into the differences between that. And I imagine that the YouTube lawyers had to have gotten involved in this conversation. There's no way that they didn't see these videos and go, we have to talk to our lawyers. And then that gets, I mean, like, I could be wrong, but this is how I feel like it would go. You find these videos, you see that it's a problem, somebody brings it to your attention, it goes up to the top. Okay, we have ISIS videos. How do we do this? Okay, we talk to our lawyers, and we looked at, like, because a lot of times the way the lawyers will interact is they will look at previous cases and go like, this is how we should interact based on this. And so that the way that the YouTube lawyers would say is like, well, we saw this case where, if you use a telephone to say something libelous, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, something gay, let's say, sorry, using this to say something defamatory or something, inappropriate in some capacity, they were found to be innocent, the phone provider. So we as YouTube will also be innocent. So we should keep the content up. But then that gets into another conversation about like, why not just remove the content? And I doubt that there's a legal issue with them removing the content or the content creator. They'll remove the content, but not necessarily the creator. And then that gets into the conversation where I feel like YouTube wanted to maximize the videos for engagement. Does that make sense? Or am I not communicating myself correctly? Because if anything, that shows that like there's a really massive like greed profit aspect here, where you have bad content, right? Like ISIS content. You have the. Does that make sense? Am I explaining myself correctly? I don't know if I am, but I want to try to make sure that like everybody understands like where I'm at. Okay, so here's what I'm trying to say, right? So you have the ISIS videos. This is the video, and then you have the ISIS content creator, right? And then, sorry, this is really bad. And what they're doing is they're saying like, okay, there are some bad videos, like beheading videos. And so because of that, we're going to get rid of those videos, but we're going to keep the content creator, which allows them to kind of skirt under the radar. But those content creators are still making radicalized content to pull people into an infrastructure. So what they're doing is like, they're probably going to go have a conversation with their lawyers. This is what I would imagine, because there's no way that this doesn't like get talked about inside like the YouTube infrastructure in some kind of a meeting. And they're talking to their lawyers and saying like, okay, are we liable if the content creator themselves stays up and says a bad thing, as long as we're getting rid of the videos that are like beheading type videos? And the lawyers go, well, there's like a phone call. There's a thing where phone providers, the PPs, they're not liable for some kind of inappropriate phone call. So, and that's how lawyers will operate. They'll operate based on like past court cases.
Nick Jensen became a member.
Hey, thank you so much for the membership, brother. The King Gut, damn, brother, thank you. That's a huge membership. Thank you so much, brother. 3 months, King Gut, Jesus. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So they look to the old case. The phone providers aren't liable, so we should be good. So then that YouTube should be good, right? And so now their lawyers have assessed, I'm assuming, hey, we're not liable. We are good. We can keep the account up. And now the question is, like, should we, right? Should we keep it up? And that's the next conversation, right? And then it's like, okay, what happens if we do, and what happens if we don't? We keep it up, we let it go, we keep it up, or we get rid of it. And then that comes to another decision of like, what do they do? And so they say like, oh, what's the negative if we get rid of it? I doubt there's any negative for them to ban the account, right? So then it's like, well, what's the positive to keeping it up? There's probably pros and cons. We might radicalize people, but then on the other hand, we make money, right? Because more users are using our platform, and we could potentially put ads on them, or maybe we can't, but it still boosts the viewership. That's how I imagine the conversation went. And so they ultimately kept it up because it would make them more money or more traffic in some capacity. Or maybe there's like a real freedom of speech absolutist there. And they're like, no, keep it up. So, okay. Sorry, I just wanted to kind of go down there. It doesn't seem like they have any real excuse, though. So
liable for running a political
maybe they
candidate
are.
that falsely
Maybe they are. Is a problem then.
accuse someone of being a communist.
Which means that we're gonna hit like we're gonna hit that whole YouTube demonetization thing again, like round 2 of fucking the shit out of the content creators for their mistake because they couldn't take ads. Oh my god. Because they couldn't figure out how to get ads off of like super inappropriate content. Now people that are making slightly edgy content are going to be over policed for a while until things get back to normal.
But then the internet came around, and the internet era posed a new challenge for this case law. Two of the first internet service providers, CompuServe and Prodigy, were sued for hosting forums where users posted defamatory content. Now, Prodigy billed itself as a family-friendly version of the internet.
Did you get a computer recently? Well, congratulations. You can now join hundreds of thousands who discovered Prodigy.
It moderated comments, removing things it thought were bad. Now, CompuServe didn't moderate anything.
CompuServe combines the power of your computer with the convenience of your telephone.
And both of those companies were sued for defamatory statements that their users posted to the service. Now, the case against CompuServe was dismissed because the court considered it a distributor of content rather than a publisher. CompuServe could only be held liable for defamation if it knew or had reason to know of the defamatory nature of the content. And since they didn't do anything to moderate their forums, the company couldn't possibly know, or at least argued it couldn't possibly know, about what the denizens of Rumorville were posting about each other. But Prodigy was found liable for failing to moderate enough. Someone went on a forum and claimed that Jordan Belfort's investment firm, Stratton Oakmont, committed fraud in connection with a stock IPO. The firm sued Prodigy and the anonymous poster for defamation, and a court held that Prodigy was liable as the publisher of the content created by its users, since it exercised editorial control over the messages on its bulletin board. Now, if the names Jordan Belfort and Stratton Oakmont ring a bell, that's because they were literally scamming people out of millions of dollars and have gone down as some of the biggest fraudsters in all of Wall Street history. The movie The Wolf of Wall Street is based on the fraud that they were perpetrating with respect to the IPOs. And it's one of the biggest ironies in all of First Amendment law that they won this lawsuit against the people that were hosting presumably accurate information about how they were scamming people out of money. That's part of the problem when websites are liable for user content, is that people can file lawsuits to stifle speech. That's what a slap lawsuit is all about. And because lawsuits are incredibly expensive, sometimes even if you scammed people out of money, as long as you file a lawsuit, you can stifle that kind of speech. But I digress. As a result of these cases, internet service providers basically either decided to not moderate at all and leave absolutely everything up, or basically moderate everything and not allow anything to go up. And basically no one was happy with this state of affairs, so Congress enacted the Communications Decency Act. And then, as now, lawmakers claim to be especially worried about things like harassment and obscene material. So they gave online...
Well, yeah, of course, because again, like Russia was very involved in passing around misinformation in the 2016 election. That's like an objective fact. They were all over social media platforms, like using it to fucking around people and try to like have an influence on the outcome. And so they pressured the fuck out of like YouTube and shit. And that caused now where we're at. It caused where we're having another conversation about like, oh, well, how do we want to interact when it comes to stuff that's being said on the internet? And it makes sense fundamentally to have these conversations. Right? Like, look, think of it this way. I know this is a weird one, but like, let's say two 17-year-olds decide to sleep with each other, right? It's perfectly legal and nobody cares. But if a 17-year-old sends a nude to like through Snapchat, like to their boyfriend or their girlfriend, that's considered, I believe, like peddling like some kind of like CP in some capacity. And it's like, okay, does that sound fair? It's like, not really. Because these two people can essentially do an action together that's like more intense, but they can't like exchange pictures. And that's one of those things where it's like, okay, we have to have the right conversation about, we need to have the conversation about the internet in a better way instead of being as lazy. And so that's kind of how I guess I would interpret it to some extent. How the fuck do I go up, bro? What do I press? Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Providers immunity from lawsuits if they moderated content. And again, the irony here is that this legislation came from the sort of family values type politicians, the people who always want to think about the children.
Somebody please think of the children!
They wanted to allow websites to remove violent and sexual conduct so that the internet could be even cleaner. The same politicians who wanted and got the little parental advisory explicit content warnings put on rap albums. But I digress again. Section 230 was intended as a way for internet companies to create and enforce basic standards to run their websites. And when the CompuServe and Prodigy cases were decided, the courts only considered whether the ISPs were publishers or distributors. But in internet service like...
Yeah, I think I saw like a case where somebody got put on like some kind of a sex offenders list a while ago, even though they were talking to somebody that was like their age. It's weird.
Website didn't fit neatly into those categories. A traditional publisher has total control over whether to publish content. A distributor can control what it buys, but it wouldn't have been practical for a human to fully screen every item. Modern social media companies host more material than any library or bookstore on earth, which makes screening all of that info daunting, if not impossible. And without Section 230, social media companies would be subject to strict liability for every message and post made on their services. So Congress chose to give those platforms and websites immunity as an incentive to get them to remove offending speech. Congress also chose not to dictate to those companies which speech they had to remove. So that brings us back to the original question in this case. How should courts read Section 230? The lower courts follow the test set forth in the Ninth Circuit case called Barnes versus Yahoo. And the Barnes test hews close to the text of Section 230. The law specifies that only 1, no interactive computer service, shall be 2, treated as a publisher or speaker, of 3, content provided by another information content provider, aka users. Now, the plaintiffs argue their claims do not treat Google as a publisher, but instead assert a simple duty not to support terrorists. They said that the ATA prohibits Walmart from supplying fertilizer, knives, or other material to ISIS, and in the same way...
Interesting. Wait, is that real? Wait, the plaintiffs argue that their claims do not treat Google as a publisher, but instead there's a simple duty not to support terrorists. They maintain that just as the ATA prohibits a retailer like Walmart from supplying fertilizer, knives, or even food to ISIS, the ATA prohibits Google from supplying ISIS with the communication buffer. Oh, fuck. I think YouTube's fucked a little bit. Interesting. What a bunch of dumbasses. Holy fuck. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. How the fuck are you up here? That makes sense. Okay. Bro, how terrible. Because I feel like YouTube might actually lose this based on this video. And the reason I find it to be terrible is because, like, YouTube fucked up by not getting by making the hard calls on getting rid of fucking terrorists. Oh yeah, I don't know if we should get rid of terrorists, guys, off the platform. And so because of that, like, just like every good boss at a company, instead of looking at how the company fucked up or the managers fucked up, they decide to over-regulate the workers that were doing the right thing the whole time. And so now people, we're gonna get like our fucking round 2 of like over regulation when it comes to like content. So this is a fucking we're in the fucking golden age, baby. We're in the golden age. Cool.
The ATA bars Google from giving ISIS a platform to communicate. The Ninth Circuit found this analogy specious. The idea of a duty not to support terrorists, quote, overlooks that publication itself is the form of support Google allegedly provided to ISIS, and publication of third-party content is what Section 230 gives to internet services. According to lower courts, publishing encompasses, quote, any activity that can be boiled down to deciding whether to exclude material that third parties seek to post online. Google says that the CDA uses the words publisher or speaker in an ordinary sense. Quote, based on an ordinary meaning, a publisher or speaker is one that publishes or speaks. Google contends that when YouTube's algorithms make recommendations, this activity is protected by Section 230. Quote, Congress underscored that publishing for purposes of Section 230 includes sorting content via algorithms by defining interactive computer service to include tools that pick, choose, filter, search, subset, organize, or reorganize content. Congress intended to provide protection for these functions, not for simply hosting third-party content. And the plaintiffs disagree. Their interpretation of the Section 230C defense is that it requires a narrower interpretation of the word publisher. The Ninth Circuit previously held that Section 230C1 uses publisher in its everyday sense, and the Second Circuit agreed. But the plaintiffs contend that the word publisher is used in Section 230C1 with a narrower and distinct meaning, which that term has in defamation law. Basically, the plaintiffs are claiming that any time YouTube recommends another video, it therefore becomes the speaker of that video, as if YouTube had produced that video itself. Now, defendants say that this interpretation doesn't make sense. Quote, watch the World Series of Poker on YouTube, and YouTube's algorithms might display Texas Hold'em tutorials. That does not mean that YouTube endorses gambling any more than spell check.
No, but we're talking about fucking terrorists. I mean, like, we're gotta be on like the argument of like, well, it's a bad thing. Gambling is not the same thing as like being a fucking terrorist, guys. The only terrorism we support is American terrorism. Okay, guys, we got to get that oil for the best of humanity. That's how I look at it. Okay.
Endorses a suggested substitute word. Westlaw endorses higher listed cases, or a chat room endorses posts organized by topic. As the Ninth Circuit noted, YouTube applies the same algorithms to all content. And it's here that I think people often misunderstand the nature of the internet and the nature of social media. With the case of YouTube, people upload millions of videos a day. If there wasn't an algorithm to sort through this deluge of videos, the only way to sort through them would be a fire hose of viewing every video chronologically, which nobody wants. It would be that or doing a pointed search to...
Yeah, but again, like, they got fucked because they decided to, they knew about the site. That's the problem, is that they knew about the site, or excuse me, they knew about the pages and they didn't get rid of them for some, like, I don't know, fucking weird freedom of speech. Or I honestly couldn't imagine why they didn't get rid of them, to be absolutely honest with you. That's what really fucks them, because it was more of like, they know they're knowingly supplying fucking terrorists. So, you know, a little different, I think, with a platform to speak.
try and find content, but then you'd never be exposed to content that you actually do want to watch but didn't know that you wanted to seek it out. And the plaintiffs have tried to differentiate between search results and other algorithmically generated results, but there's really no principled way to distinguish between results that are sorted when you actively search for something versus results that are presented to you because of a recommendation algorithm. And people love to hate algorithms, myself included. But the truth is, if there weren't algorithms to help us sort through all of the content on social media platforms, it would be—
Why do you hate the algorithm? I don't understand that. I don't know. I never really hated the algorithm. I feel like, okay, I don't know.
Impossible to wade through it. And then additionally, there's the issue of the material support related for a claim under the Anti-Terrorism Act. Now, the Department of Justice's brief in support of the plaintiffs argues that algorithmic recommendations convey the website's own implicit message that users will find the information relevant, and that makes the website liable because it's acting just like ISIS itself. Now, plaintiffs didn't claim this in their original complaint. Instead, they focused on how YouTube's recommendations amplified the ISIS speech, making it more visible to more users. But the US government urged the Supreme Court to adopt a narrow reading of Section 230 that would permit a finding that Google materially contributed to the content by matching it to user preferences. Again, basically, the Department of Justice, as well as the plaintiffs, are arguing for a standard that if any website promotes content, uses an algorithm, or recommends content to users, that website then becomes liable for—
That's stupid. I think that the whole the terrorism argument is like the best one to use. Of like, you fucking assholes knew that there were terrorists on the website, and you still decided to make the or allow them to stay up, even though you removed some of their other videos, like he had said before. I think that's much more of a better argument.
all of the speech contained within that recommendation. What happens when websites are liable? Well, remember I mentioned that this has actually happened before? Well, it has. In 2018, then President Trump signed into law 2 bills making it easier to fight sex trafficking online. That was the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act and the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act, otherwise known as FOSTA and SESTA. And those 2 laws created exceptions—
FOSTA and SESTA? Perfect names. Donald Trump literally the most based president in the fucking world at this point. Holy fuck.
To Section 230 Safe Harbor rule by stating that websites could be held legally responsible if third parties posted ads for prostitution on their platforms. The law penalizes websites which, quote, promote or facilitate prostitution. And while this includes sites that promote illegal sex work, it also—
I mean, that makes sense. You shouldn't be facilitating prostitution. What was— That's different, though. That's advertisements for prostitution, right? Like, that's like a very illegal act. Hey, what's up, bro? Wait, what? He was facing me? Dude, that's actually not true.
also allows the police to investigate any site that is knowingly assisting, facilitating, or supporting sex trafficking. This language can be read to include sites with content that is legal, such as escort services, personal ads, and pornography. Now, critics of FOSTA and SESTA warned that the new laws were too broad and they would end up killing internet content that has nothing to do with sex trafficking. Okay. And they turned out to be correct. If a third party posts content that is covered by FOSTA or SESTA, and the website fails to prevent that content from being posted, that website can be sued. And that was simply too much.
Okay, so what's the solution then to try to reduce the— I mean, I guess I've never seen ads for prostitution, so I don't know. But what's the other solution then?
Legal risk for several websites.
Should have gone for the head.
Craigslist shut down its entire personal section. Tumblr banned all adult content, and Reddit removed several subreddits, and other websites just simply shut down entirely.
Oh, that's why they did it? Damn. How many girls were upset? Because, like, I know that girls would use Tumblr for everything. I don't know. You guys are weirdos. Oh, I want to read my porn. Well, fucking weirdo. You're so weird, bro. So weird. So, but okay.
So you might ask, did any of this assist with the prosecution of sex trafficking? Well, in 2021, the U.S. Government Accountability Office released a report on the first 3 years of FOSTA and SESTA, finding that, quote, over 3 years, the Department of Justice filed just 1 case under its rules against promoting or recklessly disregarding sex trafficking. So ironically, this provided essentially the perfect natural experiment to find out what happens when websites are liable for the speech—
That's not the question.
—content of its users. One of 2 things will—
So what they said is that basically they only found 1 case in 3 years. Meaning that's a failure because they only found 1 case. But when you implement the law that says a thing is bad, the goal isn't to arrest people for it being bad. The goal is to prevent them from doing the bad thing that would get them arrested. So, like, how many places— you wouldn't even be able to figure this out. How many places decided to crack down on restrictions and like drastically reduce whatever, like, holy fuck. How many places decided to implement protocols to drastically reduce, like, the selling of prostitution? Clearly, Tumblr and other platforms did do that, so they drastically reduced the ability to engage in prostitution. So you can't really just use like, oh, only 1 person was found guilty. It's like if you implemented a new law that says that you can't fucking— I don't know. Well, it's not like a new law. But let's say that you implement like a law that says that you can't take seashells off the fucking beach. And then, so people are like, I mean, personally, let's say you're a seashell collector. You're like, you know what? I guess I'm not collecting these anymore. And you just throw them all away or whatever. And so like 99% of the people just stop collecting seashells. But then that one guy's like, no, fuck you. I've been collecting seashells for like 45 years. It's the only thing I want to do. My wife and I used to collect seashells and she died early. Okay. This is the only thing that gives me any joy in my life. And he decides to collect seashells. Right. Then you would see like, oh, okay. Look, we only prevented one person, but it's like, well, you only arrested one person. You didn't prevent. You know how many people you actually prevented, right? So
happen. Either the website shuts down that section or shuts down the entire department, or the website employs an army of moderators to remove anything even remotely offensive. You basically either live in a world where a website allows everything, scams, spam, pornography, ultra violence, just everything that you can possibly imagine you probably don't want to see in your everyday life, or you live in a world where they employ extremely expensive moderators who prevent anything that might possibly be offensive. And that, of course, assumes that a website can even afford to employ those moderators. So there are those who want to see Section 230 modified or scrapped altogether and have argued that these online services are acting like content developers. Now, oral argument in front of the Supreme Court is next week, and I'm putting my money where my mouth is on this one. I filed a brief in the Supreme Court along with Dr. Mike, Mythical Entertainment, Chubby Emu, Tim Schmoyer, and the Authors Alliance, and a bunch of other creators. We filed an amicus brief explaining the potential dire consequences of a really bad ruling on this, so we'll see how it goes. But in the meantime,
Well, that doesn't matter though, right? So what he just said to me, the way I interpreted it was like, damn, I just got fucking nay-nayed. Holy shit. The way I interpreted what he just said was we filed like some kind of a motion or whatever to say like, if this ruling goes through, it's bad for the internet. But doesn't, which might be true, probably is true, let's be real. But that doesn't mean that they're not guilty, right? So, like, I don't know. For me personally, I think we should focus more on, like, who's actually at fault rather than, like, what does it mean for the rest of us? It just seems a little selfish. At the end of the day, YouTube shouldn't be allowing, like, ISIS recruitment videos on their fucking platform. And apparently they did because they're a bunch of dumbasses. So, you know, I'm just saying, you know, what's the right thing to do versus, like, what's the best thing to do for everybody? I don't know. It might be best if we reduce... ISIS radicalization, personally.
I want Papa Gut to pee on my face, but just as a friend. There's nothing weird about that. I want him to pee on my face.
Base take, I know it's a hot take. Fuck my mom. Oh, Jesus Christ.
I'll probably just be stress eating at the end of the internet. Unless I use today's sponsor, Factor 75. Because Factor makes meeting your nutrition goals easier than ever by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian approved meals right to your doorstep. And the meals...
All right, is this the end of the video?